Hi, everybody. I'm Anne Emerson, and this is Criminally Obsessed.
This defendant walked among us, play acting as a normal suburban dad, when in reality, all along, he was obsessively targeting innocent women for death.
Today, he was exposed for exactly what he is, a sadistic, soulless, murderous monster.
Not only did Rex Heuermann admit he was the Gilgo Beach serial killer in court,
are you pleading guilty voluntarily and of your own free will?
Yes.
he confessed to killing an eighth woman that he wasn't even connected to or charged with. Her name was Karen Vergata, also known as Fire Island Jane Doe. Her identity went unknown for more than 25 years until new DNA testing revealed exactly who she was. We're going to talk about how a lab in Texas was able to do that. But first, we wanted to know what it was like to see, hear, watch Rex Heuermann in court, and how the families reacted to him finally taking responsibility for what he's done. Investigative reporter Kristin Thorne has been following the Gilgo Beach murders for more than a decade. She was on the scene when remains were found, when Rex Heuermann was arrested, and now his guilty plea. Thanks, Kristin, for joining me right after this hearing. I mean, even though we knew, Kristin, that there was going to be a hearing, when did you find out that he was expected to plead guilty to these crimes?
Yeah, this was about a week ago. But even like yesterday, we heard about the possibility that he was going to plead to an eighth murder. So that was a surprise today. So we went in knowing that, yes, it could be 7. By the way, I am sitting right outside the courthouse, which is where I am in my car. It's still finally quiet here. So we knew he was going to plead guilty to the 7. And then when we heard yesterday that there could be an 8th, we're all going through our notes and trying to figure out who it was. And we knew it was going to be Karen Vergata because she really is exactly the type of victim that he sought out, right? A young woman, a sex worker. And so he pled guilty to killing her, but he was not formally charged. That was part of the plea deal. So he's only technically been charged in 7 murders, but he acknowledged today that he did kill Karen Vergata.
It's unbelievable. And so Kristin, like, as you just said, you're right outside the courthouse in Suffolk County, right? In Long Island, New York.
Yep.
This has been the epicenter for this case for years now, as they've tried to, investigators have been coming in and out trying to get anything to go on. What was the mood like when you got to the courthouse today? What did it feel like?
Well, people got here. The doors we know open at 9 a.m. And so people were here as early as 2 a.m. to do their morning live shots. I got here around 7 and was prepared to wait in line for 2 hours. And the line was already about halfway. It was long already. And so you had everybody here. You had a mixture of the media, as well as what we didn't have years ago in 23 when he was arrested, is the true crime fans. So there was a whole community of people here who wanted to be there to witness this, and they did have enough space, thankfully, for most people to get in. And I've been saying, Anne, I was actually really bummed when I got inside because I wasn't in the main room with him because it was just too many people. So at first I was like, oh my gosh, I'm not going to be there. And I wanted to witness this. And I've been in before. I've seen him before. Right. But I got put in the overflow room, which thankfully, when I started to think about it, I was like, this could actually be a good thing. Because when you're in overflows, you get a good camera shot of the defendant, which when you're in court, you cannot see their reactions because you see the back of their head. So now I had this great perfect on shot of him. And so I was able to watch him this entire time. And the Ray Tierney, the DA, just went name by name saying, did you kill her? And every single time he said, yes, I did. And he looked right at the DA, straight in the eye, but it wasn't like he was cavalier about it or, overly confident. I've been equating it to, it's almost like you order something at a restaurant and the server comes by the table and says, is that what you meant to order? And you say, yes, that is what I meant to order. It was like that matter of fact. I was watching him trying to figure out, where have I seen this demeanor before? And that was kind of the only thing I could equate it to. And the only bit of details we got was the DA would say to him, "And how did you kill her?" And he said, "Strangulation." And that went on for 8 women, one after one. And he admitted in 3 of the Gilgo 4 cases that he used a burner phone to lure the women with promises of money because they were working as sex workers, and that he killed them and wrapped them in burlap over their head, their torso, and their legs. And that was about the most specifics we got into that we heard from him.
So, and these were the strangulation part of this. Have you heard that before, Kristin?
Yeah, we had heard, look, they didn't get into some of the more gruesome parts of these murders. I mean, several of these victims were dismembered and decapitated. So, but, they may have had some discussions before this for this allocution and this plea deal that this is what he was going to say that he did. I think a lot of people still have questions about what else happened to these women in the course of this. But ultimately, that's what he pled guilty to, was to strangling them.
And, you said that he had to speak. What did his voice sound like besides, you gave a wonderful, interpretation of what it sounded like, but sort of his body language, did he shuffle? Did he move at all? Or was he just straight up and down?
Straight up and down. When he walked into the courtroom, and again, because I had a good look at him, he walked in, he didn't acknowledge anybody in the crowd, and it was packed. Okay. So his wife was there, his ex-wife, his older daughter, and he didn't attempt to look for them. Sometimes you'll see defendants kind of look. Mm-hmm. It was also lined in the back with detectives, which is very typical in a case like this. You'll have detectives work the case. But he just walked in, looked straight ahead, looked at the judge, looked at Tierney, the DA. And, we've all seen that video that he did with the French architect, right? So it's exactly that voice. It's that voice that you hear from the YouTube video. And it does sound, it's a unique voice, right? It's got an interesting sound to it. And so it was sort of, again, it was all very surreal. I don't think I've fully wrap my head around what's happened here today, that this is actually over. I mean, the case is over. That's what's right. It's just done. And under this plea agreement, Rex Heuermann can no longer be charged in any of these 8 murders. Now, this is where it gets interesting. As part of the plea deal, he has to cooperate with the FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit. Meaning, and we don't know much more than that. That's all his attorney would say, because we're trying to figure out, are they trying to talk to him about potentially some other cases that they're trying to close, that they think he may be involved in? And Mike Brown just said that is all I'm going to say about it. It may be because they want to talk to him about his mind and what drove him to kill 8 women. And over the course of however many years, 1993 to 2010. So the murders changed over the course of that time. So there's probably a lot for them to dig into. And under this plea, he is forced to communicate with them.
Yes. So this is the behavioral unit that's coming out of the FBI out of Quantico, right? So these are the guys. Yep. These are the guys and gals, the serial killer profilers that go in there. They're the ones that invented the term serial killer, right? These are the people that actually wrote the book on it. And to have Rex Heuermann working with them, yes, not only could we find out about more victims, and, since we both have been looking into it, you've been looking into it much, much, much longer than I have, obviously, but there are obviously more investigations out there that they have got to ask Heuermann some questions on. Maybe Absolutely. I'll just say it like that.
Exactly. And I think a lot of people thought, oh, well, a part of this plea, to be very clear, this plea deal means he can no longer be charged with anything related to these 8 murders. But it doesn't preclude any other law enforcement agency from investigating him. And his attorney said something really interesting that Mike Brown said today was a relief for Rex Heuermann. I mean, you take this for what it is. I'm just relaying the information that he has been living with this for many, many years, even while he was committing these horrific acts. And then today, preparing for this for the last few weeks.
Was it a sense of relief, you think, for him to admit this today?
I did. I think that was a huge sense of relief for him. I'm not in his position, obviously, and I never will be. But when you have that type of in your head and on your body, and just, I think by admitting it, I think it's cathartic to some extent, sure.
All of us wanted to know, like, when did he decide that it was time, that he was just going to throw in the towel? Because remember, for the last 3 years, it's been, I didn't do it. And
he's not guilty, not guilty.
The attorney Mike Brown wouldn't say specifically because attorney-client privilege, but he said he did allude to the fact that it's been at least a few weeks. And I just think the walls of justice were closing in here. I mean, the DNA Mike Brown had tried to get thrown out. The judge said no. Mike Brown had tried to get each individual 7 cases at that point separate. Judge said no, they all have to be together. And so it finally, with the trial was set for just after Labor Day. So it's coming up here in a few months, essentially. He decided that this is what he wanted to do. And he also said he wanted to do it. You take this for what it is, that he didn't want to put the victims' families through a trial. And he didn't want to put his own family through a trial. Now, I'm thinking that that's probably more of a truth in that, because this would have been an extremely brutal trial for anybody to sit through. Nevertheless, his children, right? His grown children.
He certainly wanted to save the families of the victims the ordeal of going to trial, and coupled with saving his family that ordeal.
Well, do you think that there was any motive behind Rex Heuermann? I mean, I know we're talking about a serial killer and let's just like psychopath. I mean, like however you want to like term what happened and why he did it, it certainly is insanity defined. But like, what is there any motive, anything that we could like point to in this?
Nothing yet. And we asked about that today, and Mike Brown wouldn't comment on whether they had discussed anything related to a motive. Okay. Rex Heuermann for many years had been researching violent porn, had been looking at how to murder people. He's clearly a very disturbed individual. You know, what's interesting is we don't know a ton about his childhood. His childhood, for all we know, was actually pretty normal. Now, he did have a rough, because he was so big and awkward, that we know he had a rough, teenagehood, right? Like middle school, teenage, that he was very, he was picked on and all those sorts of things. Maybe that had something to do with, I remember interviewing a girl who went to high school with him, and she recalled something about him liking her, and she, didn't like him back, but, just politely told him that she wasn't interested. And, he took it really hard. And she had said that he'd been bullied a lot. Maybe we could talk about this all day long. Maybe that had something to do with why he targeted.
Well, I just wonder if that's what the FBI, their unit is going to be able to start delving into, right? Like what is the motive behind some kind of these decades-long killing spree?
Yeah, I hope so. I mean, that would be some good that could come of this, right? Trying to figure out what caused him to be like this. How did he do this and get away with this? Well, that's a whole other story. But, Suffolk police did not handle this investigation the way they should have from the beginning. And so he was able to get away with this stuff for many, many years. And he chose the perfect victim, right? Sex workers, figuring no one's going to care or look for them. And obviously, unfortunately, not for their family members, but unfortunately, he was correct about law enforcement. It's a different time now. This was, 1993, 96, 2000, and so these families were pleading for assistance and police weren't listening. So either way, FBI, I do hope that I was already trying to think, I wonder how soon, is it going to be 5 years from now, 10 years from now, where we're going to learn about what the FBI learned from him? I mean, eventually it's going to come out, and I'm really curious to see what they learn.
Oh my gosh. And and also, this isn't necessarily the time we would hear remorse or apologies from him. I expect if we get anything from him, that's going to be during the sentencing. I would expect, and also more victim impact statements, and that's June 17th. For our viewers, that'll be, that'll be coming up, and I'm sure they're going to have something to say about this. But when he walked in, did he look at any of the victims, and did you hear? And when I say victims, I mean victims' families, obviously. But did you hear the families in the courtroom at all, and did he look at them in any way?
No, it was very quiet. And no, he didn't look at anybody. I mean, he didn't look even for his own ex-wife and daughter. You would expect at least that, and he didn't even look for them. Now, we know on June 17th, his attorney says he does expect that Rex Heuermann will make a statement. I do expect that we will hear from some of the family members. Some have been more some are more willing to talk than others. But if you saw in the press conference today, I thought it was interesting that each of the family members that came up to the podium, Gloria Allred, their attorney, had them acknowledge that they accept the plea, kind of making that public statement that we support this, because so often things can get twisted, and do they really support this? And maybe this isn't what they wanted. And that's why it's so important for the record that these families state that they agree with this plea.
And I am glad that this is over as far as him pleading guilty. It took a big chunk of stress off of me and my family.
Finally, a sense of relief. The guilty plea brings solace, and I like to thank everyone who had a part in that fight for justice.
Well, and I want to also talk about Karen Vergata, because, of course, this all comes out. I mean, we got a little bit of a heads up that this could be Karen Vergata. Can you tell me who Karen was, and how this fits into his MO?
Sure. So Karen Vergata, and by the way, the DA, Tierney, says that they have met with her family prior to this.
Okay, great.
Karen Vergata was 34 years old. She disappeared in 1996 from Manhattan. She was an escort. She was 34 years old. And her body parts were first found in 1996 on Fire Island, which is near Gilgo Beach. And she was known as the Fire Island Jane Doe for many, many years. And then about 15 years after that, more of her body parts were found in another area near Gilgo. And then we just learned about Karen Vergata. Let me think. This may be, it was after he was arrested, shortly after he was arrested, that they had put together who these remains belong to, right, using public genealogy. And so right away, we're all, now they wouldn't say then we think that he's connected, but it was right up the same alley, which is the young female sex worker. And so, here we are. But the DA Tierney made it very clear in his press conference that he has met with, I think it appears to be almost all of the families of these victims.
Yeah. And she, with her becoming the number 8 victim for him, one thing that stood out to me when I was listening to the press conference was that the DA said there are still bodies on that beach that need to be identified. And yes, he said it several times, and that really stuck to me, was that, yes, this case, this indictment of these women who were murdered, this case is closed, but there's an ongoing investigation.
Yes. And so we do know that the woman known as Peaches and her toddler have been identified, and they do have somebody in custody for that. But what he's referring to is the Asian doe. And so there was an Asian male who was a sex worker who is still unidentified, who they believe, there's a lot of people we're trying to figure this out, whether Rex could be linked to that Asian doe.
Sure.
And that is still a possibility. Remember, his plea just means that these 8 women, he can't face any other charges related to that. So let's say that they find going in a year from now that he did something additional to this victim in the course of this crime. They can't now add that on. It doesn't really matter. He's facing 7 life sentences, but legally speaking, that's what the plea is. So I don't know if they'll ever establish if he killed the Asian doe. And I think what Tierney is alluding to, just so your viewers know, for our community here on Long Island, obviously these are not the only unsolved murders and unidentified people, right? And so Ray Tierney has really made it a mission, and I think he's probably seen the success of what happened with the Gilgo Beach Task Force to make sure that all these other families, right? We have a lot of unsolved murders and unidentified people who have been killed. He wants to make sure that all those families get the same outcome as these families did.
Well, and also we heard from Asa Ellerup today, too, which I thought was fascinating. The ex-wife to Rex Heuermann, who said that she would, up until now, never accept that he was the man responsible for this until she heard it out of his mouth, which she did today.
My thoughts and prayers are with the victims and their families. Their loss is immeasurable, and the focus should be on them at this time and moment. I ask that you give some privacy to my family as they navigate through this very difficult time.
How did you not see what he was? How did you not see what he had done? You were living with him.
Sir, the district attorney's office has thoroughly investigated these crimes, okay? It has been proven.
You were living in the same house with him.
She was away.
What were the signs?
She was away each and every occasion. We've answered this 1,000 times, okay?
Yes. And so this morning before she went in, we all, kind of ambushed her as we do as the press and asked her what she was thinking. And she only spoke through her attorney at that point. And he said, yes, until she hears it out of his mouth, she will not believe it. And she has always said that she has a hard time, I'm sure even now, believing that he did this because it's just not the man you take this for what it is. This is what she says. This is not the man she knew. It wasn't the man she married. But clearly in court today, she heard her ex-husband go victim by victim, acknowledging that he killed them. And then she made a statement outside court, which was pretty monumental because she's made very few of them publicly, that she wanted today to be about the victims, that's who mattered. And it wasn't about her and it wasn't about him. It was about remembering them.
Yeah, I know. And she really kept it to that. She wouldn't take any other questions from what I could tell. But she was trying to keep the focus on the victims that he now pleaded guilty to killing. But there is a lawsuit as well against them. Can you tell me what this lawsuit is? Against Asa and her grown children, right?
Yes, against Asa and Victoria. And I'm not sure if the son, I don't know if he was named, but yesterday, before all of this happened, the grown son of Valerie Mack filed a civil lawsuit against Asa Ellerup and Victoria Heuermann for civil damages, essentially saying that they knew who Rex Heuermann was, that they knew, according to their lawsuit, that he was involved in doing this, that he was killing people. And because they knew that, they denied this son the right to his mother, right? And so that's the damage. What is the damage? That's what the damage is, that he has lost his mother in the course of this. Now, this has made Asa and the family very upset. Her attorney was on fire this morning talking about this lawsuit.
Let me be absolutely clear. We just heard in the courtroom, Rex Heuermann and Rex Heuermann alone is responsible for these horrific crimes. Any suggestion that Asa Ellerup or Victoria Heuermann were involved is irresponsible. They have no knowledge, no involvement, or any connection to these heinous acts. Mrs. Ellerup and Victoria accept today's outcome without question. She and her family have cooperated fully since day one with law enforcement and will continue to respect this legal process as it comes to a conclusion.
And he brings one of the point. I mean, I understand, I don't agree with it, but I understand why people are suspicious of Asa Ellerup. She was an adult. She was living in the house, although she was out of town when many of these murders happened. And she has been cleared by investigators, straight cleared. Where Bob Macedonio, their attorney, has an amazing point is that Victoria Heuermann was 3 years old when Valerie Mack was killed. And so there is no case at all involving Victoria Heuermann. And she did not speak today, Victoria. She is, she stood literally right behind me in line getting into the courthouse.
Oh gosh,
and
really?
Yeah. And Asa was right here. And I just did very pleasant talk. I don't talk anything about the crime. And obviously I'm talking about the weather. And, but Victoria is just looked really, really distraught. Asa kept her sunglasses on the whole time, so I didn't make eye contact. But Bob Macedonio has said that these lawsuits and these claims that people have made against the family have been really, really painful. And I believe that. I do believe that. And I do feel for Victoria because, she's now being sued for something that happened when she was 3 years old. So he'll be able to counteract that. So that is the new, and now but that is a lawsuit that is now happening. And I asked Bob Macedonio, what's the next step in that? And it's going to now go through the legal process.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, this case, because it has these ripple effects, right? Like people can't believe, and I've heard this from the folks we've talked to on this case as well, that there's a possible torture chamber down in a basement of a house, yet, the family had no clue that anything was going on in that house, even though they were out of town during the time. I guess it's just hard for people to believe. The house was quite small. It was like less than 1,400 square feet, I think. Kristin, it's just, we live with our partners and children. And I can see why the public is like, you got to be kidding me.
Sure.
You don't know what's going on in your house. Come on.
Yeah. Look, I understand where it's coming from. Mm-hmm. I think Bob Macedonio made a very good point today when he was talking about this, which is if Ray Tierney and the prosecution had even an inkling that Asa Ellerup was involved, and they have a ton of evidence and 120 terabytes and 7,015 pages.
Come on.
Okay. That is a ton of evidence.
Crazy.
And if she showed up in any of that, they would be prosecuting her. And I think that is a strong argument, right? And so, but you have to have faith in the prosecution and in our law enforcement. And if you do, then you do have to accept that Asa Ellerup did not know, had nothing to do with any of this that was going on. I do understand it is a small house. It was a cluttered house. It is by far the weird house on the block. I've told people, if you walk down that block and you said, where would a serial killer live? That is exactly where he would live. I couldn't believe it when I first saw it. I said, this can't be real. I mean, it should look like every other house, right? Like, don't you want to fit in? He made no attempt to fit in. The whole family didn't. So look, I get where the suspicion is. I think, we will never really know what she knew, right? That's different than what she may have done.
Yeah.
Maybe she saw things in the house. And now she looks back on it and she goes,
that's what I was saying.
Oh my gosh. That's what that was, right?
His mementos he was keeping, those articles that he was holding on to. I mean, even this woman who says that she went on a date with him, Nikki said that she told us that, he was asking her all about Gilgo Beach what she knew about it, had she heard about it, all this kind of stuff, and makes you wonder what the dinner table conversations were like at Rex Heuermann's house.
He said, "Do you know about the Gilgo Beach Killer?" And like, it's Long Island, of course. So I was like, "Yeah, of course I do." And he was like, got really excited, but like when that was at the point where like his whole body language shifted, like it was weird. Like he came really close in and was like super excited to talk about it.
Just because you're eccentric doesn't mean that you have any clue what's actually going on underneath your nose.
Yes. You know, I heard someone describe Asa to me. It was a while ago, when we were kind of digging into the family and who they were. And I forget who it was, but she, and again, I don't know her personally. I'm just saying what somebody told me, but she's sort of a little, you know, she doesn't really pay attention to a lot that's going on around her. And, you know, she's, I don't know, flighty is the word. I don't know what it is, but I remember someone telling me that it would be possible based upon what they know of Asa. And this was someone, it was either her attorney or somebody who knew her pretty intimately, that this could have been happening right under her nose. And it's just her personality. Like she just wouldn't have noticed it.
No peripheral, like she's just living with those blinders on of what's going on. Well, I mean, that's just fascinating. And I know we've got more coming up on June 17th. You expect to hear from some of our victims' families?
I do. I hope that they will talk. I was happy to see that during the press conference today, we did hear from a few of them. I've said before, the families have been very private this entire time, all these years, even when this all first happened in 2010, when the story really broke. And so I was really heartened to see that they were there at the press conference. Not everybody wanted to talk, but some did, and they came up. And I do hope that they make a statement. I would love to hear from them, you know, about what this has done to them, about their loved ones and how much they're missed, especially from the children. I mean, some of these kids were, you know, they're grown now, but they were 2, 3, you know, when their moms just disappeared.
Yeah, it's heartbreaking to see those kids.
Yeah, that's where I'm really, you know what, I may actually aim to get into the overflow room for the sentencing because
their faces.
Right, because I want to be able to see his face and their face, because that camera has a great view. And I really am interested. That is where, I mean, quite frankly, I don't think we're going to see any emotion out of him then either. I just think that there's no recognition.
No, he didn't see them as people. He just saw them as objects. This was just something that he did to them. And, you know, and also just from what we've seen before, right, Kristin? I mean, we just lived through the Brian Kohberger victim impact statements. That really has set the bar for me as far as hearing from victims' families of how unbelievably painful that was. I can, you know, it really put it into perspective for these cases. So, yeah, I mean, there's nothing Rex Heuermann can say right now. There's no I'm sorry that would ever even get close for these families, I don't think.
No, not at all.
And he's not sorry.
No. I think they would still, sometimes families would just want to hear something come out of people's mouths, like just some sort of acknowledgement that they had something to do with this. And so I was glad to hear from Mike Brown that Rex Heuermann is expected. He is going to make a statement. Who knows what it will be, but it will certainly be another big day.
It certainly will. And hopefully we'll see you there. You know, your reporting on this case has been just extraordinary. Well, it was just like being in the courtroom with you. So I appreciate that.
Yeah. No, it was very interesting. And to see, and like the amount of people who have now, who have podcasts, who are kind of like these independent journalists who are now covering. Yeah, it was pretty wild. It's to see how even just in the last 3 years, there's all these new people on the scene who have never been with us and we've been covering this for so long. I think I'm not saying it's good or bad. It's very interesting.
It's just a different landscape, isn't it? You're vying for seats. It's a very different. I saw it a lot at Murdoch with the true crime fans with Alec Murdoch's trial. It was filled. The galley was filled every day with true crime fans that came in. But at Lori Vallow Daybell, that's when I started seeing like the real podcasters coming in, and the whole vibe was changing, because it was like you could be media if you said that you were media, and you were, it was a really different scene.
It is. But here's what I want people to know. In this country, you are, as a citizen, allowed to go to any of these hearings. And so you are, and there were people there today who weren't with the media, weren't podcasters, weren't anything. They just wanted to be there, including a guy who I interviewed in 2023, who lives in the same neighborhood or thereabout, who I just happened to run into in line, who was here. And so I do want people to know, I think a lot of people think that we operate in a closed court system. This is an open court system in this country. And so any sentencing, any hearing, any trial, anything, you are entitled to witness that as a citizen. And I would love for people to do that and see how the judicial system works. It's fascinating.
You're 100% right. And I love it too. Like I had amazing conversations with people throughout that 6 weeks with Alec Murdoch, just talking about what happened that day. They just wanted to be a part of it. They wanted to see how justice worked. It wasn't just the Murdoch scene. It was the fact that they were sitting in a courtroom hearing how all this went down. So yeah, I totally agree with you. Everybody should go and sit in a courtroom every once in a while and see what's going on.
Absolutely.
It's all right. So thank you. I appreciate it. Kristin was our eyes and ears in that courtroom with Rex. How she described him admitting to those murders: cavalier, overly confident. Matter of fact, like he was ordering food off of a menu in a restaurant. It just gave me the chills. But the big shock was learning about this 8th victim, Karen Vergata. He admitted in court to intentionally causing her death. I had to talk to the genealogy experts over at Othram about Karen's case. Let's hear what founder and CEO of Othram, Dr. David Mittelman, has to say. David Mittelman from Othram, thank you so much for joining us. We just watched a press conference with DA out of Suffolk County, New York, talking about Rex Heuermann. Now, Rex Heuermann, the Gilgo Beach serial killer, has pleaded guilty to killing 7 women in Long Island, but now has acknowledged that he also murdered a woman who was known as the Fire Island Jane Doe. And we now know her name is Karen Vergata. We know this kind of information because of the work that you're doing, right? Can you talk to me about the Fire Island Jane Doe? What DNA was given to you in order for you to be able to identify this woman as Karen?
Yeah, and I have to say it's a relief to find out that he was able to confess to these crimes. It'll certainly get answers to the families a little quicker than putting everyone through a trial. And this case involving Fire Island Jane Doe is an interesting case because it's a lot older than perhaps some of the other cases in the Gilgo Beach murders. In fact, it's so old, it's from 1996, but it's an important case because it basically demonstrates that his reign of terror actually began decades earlier than perhaps people realized, and hopefully there aren't a whole bunch of more victims. But she was found in 1996, and there was just no way to identify her. Right. By the time we got involved, and just to give you the history on the case, she was entered into NamUs, which is the federal repository for human remains cases, in 2011. And again, no identity. And the technology to do the kind of work that we do wasn't around in 1996, and it wasn't around in 2011. But it was around, we started our company in 2018. And in 2022, the Suffolk County Police Department teamed up with Othram and the Bureau. And we actually looked at a number of cases. There's some other identifications that we made of victims that were found in the Gilgo Beach area. And there's more that are in the works. And so we teamed up and all they had was skeletal remains, But, these remains were found on the beach. They had been sitting for decades. And I believe there was some previous testing that was done prior to Othram getting involved, and they weren't able to build a DNA profile. This is a really important thing. This idea of being able to identify the source of DNA, even without a suspect or a match, is premised on 3 steps. One is that you have to be able to essentially digitize the physical evidence. In this case, is skeletal remains. You got to be able to take those skeletal remains and get the DNA data off of it. And that's a challenge in itself that we could talk about if you wanted to. It's not generally well reported, though. There's no inference or genetic genealogy or records tracing if you can't actually get good DNA markers from the original evidence. And then the second step is, of course, building that DNA profile. And the third is using whatever tools you can use to infer identity. In this case, it was a genetic genealogy search and the building out of family trees. And so that's how Karen got identified. We got involved in 2022. It took a little time to work this case, but by I think it was maybe it was in August of 2023, late summer, early fall in 2023, we were able to publicly make that announcement. There was already some speculation that she might be a victim, and part of this Long Island serial killer case. But there wasn't a clear enough of obviously of a line of connection to formally charge him, and so it's just amazing. Now it's been another couple of years, and finally full circle, he's taken accountability and responsibility for this poor girl's death. And anyways, we're just thrilled that we were able to help. It's very hard. How do you work a homicide if you don't know who the victim is? How would they even begin to connect it to anything if they don't know who it is? So just getting her name back, I think, was already a great relief.
Well, a great relief and a massive leap into the investigation, right? Like she does fit the profile of what she was doing for a living, where she was, what she looked like, where she was found. And then to be able to take some of those profile of the victim and match it to what Rex Heuermann was up to in the Gilgo Beach area, then they could start making some investigatory sort of leaps, as it were, into telling him, no, there's an 8th victim here.
That's why it's so important to understand the identity of the victim, because once you know that, you can trace, the last days or weeks of that person's life, who they were talking to, where they were moving around. And like you said, it allows you then to intersect that with the secondary investigation of the suspect that was alleged to have murdered so many women. And so you really need the identity of the victim to kind of tie those cases together. And that's why it's so important. Obviously, it's important for the family, too. Families probably wondered for years, what had happened to their daughter, to their sibling, to their friend. And so we had to get the answer for that reason as well.
I mean, David, it's extraordinary because you literally are, speaking the language of forensic criminologists, the people that are working as boots on the ground investigators at crime scenes. They're going to tell you, know who your victim is, know what's going on with your victim, and you're going to find who did this, So I think that you work hand in hand with the kind of boots on the ground investigators that are out there doing this kind of work.
Yeah, no, and I mean, look, anything we know about anything related to investigations comes from our work with investigators. So, we're not law enforcement. I don't have an investigative background. I do what I can to assist the folks that are actually boots on the ground doing the work that they do. But it was really exciting to do the research study because they've always told us, like you said, that you need to know your victim before you can work the crime. But we now have real data.
And David, I mean, as far as like when you get, in this case, 1996, you're getting evidence from 1996, right? Which is the remains of this young woman. And you're looking at it. I mean, what kind of shape, can you tell me anything about the sort of the nitty gritty of what you were dealing with when you were able to get the DNA from the Jane Doe at the time?
Yeah, I mean, some of these remains, there's like small fragments that are left. Sometimes the bone is really not solid anymore. It's become kind of mush. And there's just like very little parts of it that are still, productive for DNA testing. And the other problem is that they've been sitting around for a while, and they weren't sitting in a lab originally. They were sitting out buried in a beach area. And so there's
And dirty.
bacteria and there's mold and other things that have grown on it. And so, and all that has DNA too. Bacteria has DNA. There's DNA and all sorts of things that are sitting on there. And so not only are you degrading the DNA, the condition of the remains are getting worse because they've been sitting for, some 30 some odd years. But also there's now other DNA that's not human that's come in there. And all of this, there's chemical damage. All of this basically compounds and makes it harder and harder to number one, get DNA that's human, but number two, also do something with that DNA. So, we started from just really terrible material, like I said, that had failed other labs. 2022, we hadn't done a lot of work in New York yet. And so, we told the agency, we said, look, I know you've had trouble elsewhere, but give us a chance. We've got a very different way that we process forensic material. It's truly one of a kind, and we've been able to get really great DNA profiles, not just DNA, but usable DNA profiles that can find relatives from almost anything. And so, and we've gone on to since really push the limits. I would say in 2026, of course, there's always going to be something that we can't process, but there are fewer and fewer forensic items that are not really amenable to the kind of work that we do. So it's another very exciting thing is we're constantly doing research and development to figure out how can we work with less DNA? How can we work with DNA that's more damaged, DNA from just really fringe items, touch DNA, hair, all these kind of things that have previously been barriers for moving the investigation forward.
Karen Vergata was never reported missing. How were you able to link her DNA to her family tree? Was it through what you're talking about, going through genetic genealogy?
Yeah. So this was genetic genealogy, and credit for building out these trees belongs to the Bureau. Karen died in 1996, so I imagine she had a very small internet footprint. The internet was just getting, the World Wide Web was just getting off the ground. So you could imagine there's not a lot of information about her online. She kind of vanished around that time period, and then a couple phone calls to family members, and next thing you know it, family confirms that they've not seen her or heard from her. They put two and two together. And then also to remember that whenever you do these investigations, at the end, you confirm that you have the right person by doing a direct one-to-one test between the person that you think is a relative and the DNA from the crime scene or from the remains. And so all of that tied together led to the answer. So you're right, in general, it's easier if the person's reported missing, but even if they're not reported missing, you'll eventually track them down because you essentially seek to identify who amongst these people, reported missing or not, are essentially not accounted for in 2026.
Are you working on any other cases with in the Gilgo Beach serial killing?
Yeah, there's a number. There's a handful of remains that have been recovered, and they're still being worked. There's one particularly interesting case involving someone that has an Asian biogeographical ancestry. And that's a very complicated ancestry to work using traditional genetic genealogy. People from Asia are not well represented in the genetic genealogy databases. So that's certainly an example of a case. And so, yeah, there's probably going to be an ongoing effort. There's unfortunately a lot of remains that have been found in that area, and they're not necessarily all tied to the same person, but nonetheless, they need to be identified, and then there needs to be an investigation. And there's another set of remains that we helped identify, and they have a different suspect in mind for her death. And so, we basically work to identify as many as we can, and then we count on the investigators to kind of connect the dots and see who might be responsible.
With this case, with the Gilgo case, I was just curious, just to be clear, you weren't looking at Rex Heuermann's DNA. You were just looking to identify victims. Is that correct? You're not connecting him to those victims.
No, the connection between Karen and the possible connection between Karen and Rex was based on non-DNA evidence, right? Is based on, like you said, her background, whether she fits the profile. So had there been suspect DNA that was found, then we could have helped there. And that's happened before. We identified an unidentified murder victim off a highway in Atlanta. And then there was DNA that was found on her body from the person that sexually assaulted and murdered her. And so then we were able to identify the victim and the perpetrator. But in this particular case, all we had were these, terribly degraded, partial skeletal remains. It's her skeletal remains, so there was no longer any evidence that would definitively through DNA tie a particular suspect to that case. And I think that's why it was so hard, and it took that extra investigative effort to make the connection.
David, it was just fascinating. Thank you so much for talking to me about this today. And it really puts it into perspective. You know, I said it earlier when we were watching the press conference with the DA, the generations of investigators that have worked on these cases. I think there was one of his victims that was identified in 1993. And then you have Karen now in 1996. And then you have these huge gaps up to 2009 and so on. And it's incredible how many people have been involved in being able to solve these crimes. It's extraordinary.
Yeah, it's also just terrible because like I said, it looks like his killing spree is gone for decades. It's just absolutely terrible. So I hope that the families, at least they got some answers. There's no really way to reverse what happened, but at least they have answers. I just hope that they can continue to kind of understand, and maybe this is part of the plea deal. I don't know, but maybe as part of this plea, they can seek to understand what else he's done and what other damage he's caused, because
100%.
There could be any number of other open-ended cases that also are tied to families that are waiting for answers. So I just hope that they're able to make those connections.
Well, as part of his plea deal, David, he has to talk to the behavioral unit at FBI, and I'm sure they are going to be looking at anything else that could possibly have happened. I mean, this is too many years, like you said. Thank you so much. I appreciate it. There you have it. There's no one I would rather talk to as we sit here with this guilty plea. Kristin brought us into the courtroom, and David took us behind the curtain to understand how this 8th victim, Karen Vergata, got her name back. It'll be so interesting to see what happens next in this case. And we'll be covering the sentencing June 17th, right here at Criminally Obsessed. Be sure to like and subscribe to Criminally Obsessed so you don't miss any of the fascinating updates to this case and so many others. And be sure to leave us a 5-star review if you can. It goes a long way to help others find our podcast.